We believe in the horned god and in the goddess of the moon.
But yes, we do consume each other's blood on occasion for ritual purposes.
The amount of silly dabbling in the occult that goes on today scares me, and what they don't understand is that they're invoking forces which they can't fathom.
After months of digging through history and folklore to uncover everything I could about witchcraft, I've stumbled upon some shocking and disturbing truths. In today's world, thanks to TV and entertainment, witchcraft is often seen as something fun, adventurous, and innocent. But what if I told you that beneath that facade is something much darker, something most people don't even realize exists? Hi, I'm Mr. Unveiled, a research addict, and today we're unveiling what witchcraft is at its core, which might forever change how you see the world and even your favorite movies. Witchcraft is the practice of using supernatural powers, usually from nature, spirits, gods, or even demons, to influence one's life, someone else's, or even the world itself. This includes casting spells through rituals, mixing potions and herbs for love, healing, and divination, or even predicting the future using techniques such as scrying. The earliest forms of witchcraft can be traced to prehistoric times such as ancient Egypt, Babylonia, and Greece, where magic was practiced openly. The common belief was that spirits could inhabit everything from animals and plants to rivers and the earth itself. To tap into these spiritual powers, our ancestors used rituals, dances, and offerings, which are considered some of the earliest forms of witchcraft. For example, ancient Egyptian priests in the temple of Osiris and Anubis used spells for healing, protection, and preparing the dead for the afterlife. A few blocks over, ancient Assyrians and Babylonians recited magical texts in the form of incantations to ward off evil spirits and to invoke divine protection from gods like Enki and Marduk. The Greeks venerated figures like Circe, Hecate, and Diana, goddesses closely associated with witchcraft and magic. But the question is, how much of that ancient power, if any, still remains hidden in plain sight today? You see, throughout history and different cultures, witchcraft branched out in many different directions, and today we can broadly classify to traditional witchcraft, folk magic, ceremonial magic, Wicca, and one of the most disturbing and obvious types of witchcraft that will mainly be the focus of this video, diabolical witchcraft. Across Europe during the Middle Ages, diabolical witchcraft was believed to rely on Satan worship and demonic powers to achieve evil goals, like causing storms, sterility, bad luck, sickness, poverty, and death. Witches were thought to form pacts with the devil or demons, trading their soul or loyalty for power and wealth, which fueled fear and superstition throughout the continent. This fear then culminated in witch hunts, where thousands of women and some men were accused of witchcraft. They were tortured and eventually executed, most famously during the Salem witch trials in the US and in places like Germany, France, and England. Scholars generally agree that between 40,000 and 100,000 individuals were executed as witches, many of whom were innocent people. Although many were falsely accused and, sadly, severely punished, it doesn't change the fact that witchcraft was a real and practiced belief. So, because of this severe persecution, they often held night gatherings called Black Sabbaths, where they engaged in wicked and illegal rituals, such as nude dances around fires, consumption of hallucinogens, and communion with the devil. This is how the quote from the Encyclopedia of Witchcraft and Demonology describes these gatherings. I quote, "At the Sabbath, witches performed profane rites, feasting and engaging in sexual orgies, all under the eye of Satan. Of course, sometimes they practiced witchcraft alone as individuals, but in most cases they did it in groups as part of a witch coven or a secret society. Sometimes they gathered in fields, but mainly in the woods, and for a good reason. Woods were believed to hold immense magical power. It was the ideal place for rituals, where the veil between the spiritual and physical worlds was thinnest. Sacred ancient trees like oaks were often used as altars, and the woods were linked to the worship of the devil, or the horned god, which is a mix of deities like Pan from Greece, Osiris from Egypt, Bacchus from Rome, and of course their female counterparts. So, the worship of this horned god often involved renouncing Christianity and performing some of the most shocking rituals I've ever come across. But let's take it step by step. One of the first things that intrigued me is how they actually got to Black Sabbaths. And the interesting thing is, you already know how, because it's one of the most iconic depictions of a witch, and that is flying on a broomstick. The broomstick is one of the most symbolic and cherished tools of a witch, and here is why. It was specifically made for magical purposes, crafted from a bundle of broom twigs attached to a stick, hence broomstick. It was used for a wide range of things, from sweeping negativity out of the house to opening portals, and of course, quote-unquote flying. To achieve this magical flight, witches would use flying ointments made from poisonous hallucinogenic plants. They would smear the ointment on the broomstick while naked, and the hallucinogens would take effect as they were absorbed through the mucous membranes of their private areas while riding the broomstick. Of course, this wasn't actual flying, but rather wild, crazy jumping that symbolized leaving the physical body and entering astral realms. They didn't just ride broomsticks though, sometimes they would ride even goats. Now, the reason why this is so intriguing and quite disturbing is because there is one more ingredient they would use to achieve this. Isabel Gotti, a Scottish witch born in 1632, confessed that the witches applied a special ointment made from herbs and the fat of unbaptized infants. This was backed by another accused witch, Ursula Gotts. She stated that the rituals at the Sabbath involved children and their fat, which they believe gave them the power to fly and cast spells. Sadly, we're just scratching the surface of what was happening on these meetings, because one of the most documented and distressing rituals during these gatherings was the infamous Black Mass, which can be viewed as an initiation ritual that marks the entry of new members into the coven. 19th century literature on the Black Mass gives a disturbing description of what these gatherings looked like. For example, one story goes, young woman brought by an Italian man to a field on the night of St. John's Eve. The man drew a circle on the ground with a holly stick while chanting from a black book. Then a large goat with horns appeared, accompanied by two women and a man dressed like a priest. The goat asked who the woman was, and after the man explained, the goat made him make a strange sign of the cross. This goat had a black candle between its horns, from which the others lit their own candles. The woman was then taken by the goat into the woods and assaulted in a way that caused her great pain, with goat's seed being described as cold as ice. Later, the group met every Wednesday and Friday, with more than 60 people carrying black candles. They danced in circles facing away from one another. Water was used instead of wine, and the goat urinated in the water to create quote-unquote holy water, which was then disgustingly sprinkled on the group. During these meetings, they shared stories of their witchcraft, including poisoning, bewitching, curing diseases with charms, and causing crops to fail. Isabel, the witch we mentioned a moment ago, also mentioned making a pact with the devil. She said she renounced her Christian baptism and entered into a pact with the devil in an Aldern church. Her new name under the devil was Janet, and she also confessed engaging in sexual relations with him on subsequent meetings. Speaking of this pact-making or covenant-making, there was also a witch coven in Sweden that gathered at Blue Hill Island, and this is what they said about entering into a covenant. The devil made each of us cut our fingers and use our blood to sign his book. Then we were baptized again, renouncing our Christian faith and swearing our souls to him. But where did these covenant-making rituals come from? The origins can be traced back to a small town in France in the 1630s called Laudun, where ancient practices evolved into what we see today. A local priest named Urban Grandier allegedly used witchcraft to summon demons to possess a group of nuns in the Ursuline convent. As evidence against him, the church presented 2 diabolical pacts written in Latin. One of these was written backward with scribble abbreviations, and has since been published and translated in various books on witchcraft. The document was filled with strange symbols and signed by Grandier and several demons, including Satan himself. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because it's important to understand that none of these practices were random. All of these elements are rooted in the way ancient civilizations made covenants between themselves and their gods. These key elements were a sacrifice, shedding of the blood, making an oath, sharing a meal or having a feast, change of a name, and of course, sexual intercourse. Sex being one of the most important tools in the occult, and a powerful covenant in itself, is why sex magic is considered one of the most potent methods for casting spells and manifesting desires. One more wild and grotesque sexual ritual attributed to pact-making was the ritual of kissing the devil's backside, known as the osculum infame, or the kiss of shame. This act sealed the pact between the witch and the devil, symbolizing union and absolute submission. The backside was believed to represent Satan's other face, with the anus seen as another mouth, and so the devil would demand that his followers kiss the backside of a ram, black cat, toad, or human host, as these were the forms he took when appearing to his subordinates. The kiss of shame was considered more spiritual than carnal. For instance, it was believed that by kissing a toad on the anus or mouth, exchanging saliva and licking its slime, the participants would become spiritually dead and poisonous to the rest of the world. In the 13th and 14th centuries, the Knights Templar were accused of practicing this exact ritual. It was said that Templar initiates were required to kiss their superiors on the anus, navel, base of the spine, and phallus. Some even worshipped the devil in the form of a black cat, which they kissed beneath the tail. This bears a striking resemblance to another sect known as the Luciferians, who also required initiates to kiss a toad, duck, or goose as part of their devil worship rituals. So we see that these practices are not some random acts of rebellion against the church, but rather stem from ancient beliefs and the worship of deities we mentioned earlier, involving some of the most well-known satanic secret societies, like Luciferians and the Knights Templar. While the osculum infame, or the kiss of shame, is diabolical on its own, it serves merely as the gateway. Beyond it lies an even darker ritual, one that reveals the true horrors of witchcraft, and that ritual is cannibalism. Now, I won't dive into the graphic details as this topic is quite sensitive and sadly involves children, but the good news is that it was quite rare. However, witches who allegedly performed this ritual in medieval times believed it would grant them supernatural powers, enhancing their abilities and in some cases promising eternal youth or even immortality. But what is astonishing to realize is that many famous fairy tales draw inspiration from ritualistic cannibalism. For example, one such tale goes, in the woods, Two children, a brother and sister, stumble upon a house made of candy after being abandoned by their stepmother. Living in poverty and hunger, they start eating chunks of the house. And as you might expect, a witch shows up and invites them inside to eat as much food as they want. However, she ultimately traps them in a cage to fatten them up, planning to eat them and use their fat for ritualistic purposes. This fairy tale, of course, is Hansel and Gretel. One of the reasons such tales were told to children is to, of course, instill fear in them to stay away from creepy strangers. But just like in this fairy tale where children are lured deeper into the dark forest, the late 1960s saw the public drawn into the mysterious world of the occult. But this time it wasn't a trail of breadcrumbs, they were led by something far more enticing. Music, hippie movement, rebellion, and ritual. In a strange twist, two groundbreaking records, both called The Satanic Mass, would emerge just a year apart, one from a band pushing boundaries in rock, and the other from a man who would forever alter the face of modern Satanism. But the stories behind them couldn't be more different. In 1969, the US band Coven recorded a 13-minute satanic mass as part of their album named Witchcraft Destroys Minds and Reaps Souls. The band claimed this was the first black mass ever published. The album featured chants and materials devoted to Satan, drawn from traditional occult practices and grimoires. Some of the chants, especially in the track Satanic Mass, were inspired by rituals from LaVeyan Satanism, a movement founded by Anton LaVey. LaVey also released a record titled The Satanic Mass, which included readings of satanic rituals and philosophy. So you see, witchcraft goes far deeper than we might initially think. It involves the worship of the sun, moon, and stars, or in the other words, fertility of the horned god and the mother goddess. But this still begs the question, what drove these individuals to partake in such extreme practices? As I was researching throughout the months, I realized that the answer is, in fact, quite simple. There is many who want to get to the influence, power, and wealth witchcraft holds, even if it means performing these diabolical rites, aligning themselves with demons, and losing their souls. However, there is also an element of peer pressure within these covens, where individuals feel compelled to participate in the rituals simply because everyone else is doing so. Today, just like thousands of years ago, witchcraft is very prevalent, and for that reason, witchcraft is not making a comeback, because it never really went away. It simply became quieter, hidden, yet at the same time, it's right in front of your face, if you can see it. I'm Mr. Unveiled, a research addict with a passion for history and mythology. Thank you for sticking to the end of my first video, and if you enjoyed it and you're a sucker for knowledge like me, you know what to do.